My world is built on verifiable facts. I'm a forensic accountant. I'm not the boring guy who does your taxes. I'm the guy a high-powered law firm sends in after the boring guy has been cooking the books. I'm a human polygraph. I find the rot. My life is clean, it's precise, and it's solitary. My apartment is beige. My car is a silent, offensively sensible electric sedan. I don't do messy. So, I was pretty pissed off when a partner at my firm handed me a file for a legacy asset in rural Oregon. It wasn't a sleek corporate merger. It was a tiny, failing ironworks that was part of a larger, messy estate we were trying to settle. It's a black hole, Arthur, my boss said, tapping the folder. It's hemorrhaging money. The heir wants to sell it for parts, but the will is complicated. Go out there. See if the guy running it is a fraud or just an idiot. Your job is to make the bleeding stop. Liquidate it. I drove for 4 hours, my silent electric car gliding through a landscape of endless pine trees, until the pavement turned to gravel. I finally found Croft Ironworks. It wasn't a business. It was a 19th century blacksmith shop, a huge, drafty barn that smelled of soot, coal, and rain. I walked in, my Italian leather shoes crunching on the dirt floor, and was hit by a wall of intense, dry heat. In the center of the cavernous space, a man was hammering on a piece of glowing, red-hot steel. Sparks were flying with every deafening clang of the hammer. He was a big guy built like a linebacker, wearing a thick leather apron, a sweat-stained t-shirt, and a look of intense, almost terrifying focus. He finished his sequence, plunged the metal into a trough of water with a violent hiss, and then finally turned to me. He was covered in soot, his face grim. "You're the number cruncher," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Arthur," I said, trying to keep my voice from echoing. "The accountant. And you're Miles Croft." "Yeah." He wiped his hands on a rag, leaving a black smear. "Let me guess. You're here to tell me I'm broke." "That's what the numbers say," I said, pulling out my tablet. "I need to see your books. QuickBooks, your AP/AR ledgers, your payroll." He just laughed. A short, sharp, humorless bark. He walked over to a cluttered workbench and kicked a dusty, old shoebox full of receipts. "There you go. Knock yourself out." I stared at the shoebox. This was my nightmare. "This is not a system, Mr. Croft. This is a fire hazard. Your business, according to this file, is losing $20,000 a quarter." "My business," he said, picking up the piece of metal he'd been working on, a beautiful, intricate hinge, "takes 40 hours to make. I bill for it when it's done. I don't bill for time. I bill for this. Your little spreadsheet can't understand that." He was hostile. I was condescending. It was a match made in hell. I told him I'd need a few days. He told me to stay out of his way. I set up my entire, high-tech operation in the corner of his freezing, dusty office. I had my laptop, my portable scanner, my hotspot. I was a sterile, digital island in his analog ocean of grime. I spent 2 days trying to make sense of his shoebox, my fingers getting black with soot. He'd just work the rhythmic, deafening clang, clang, clang of his hammer, the only soundtrack. It was maddening. I was scheduled to leave on Friday. On Thursday night, the sky just opened. It wasn't just rain, it was an ice storm. The temperature plummeted. The wind howled. And then, with a flicker and a thud, the power went out. My laptop screen went black. My scanner died. My hotspot was gone. I was in total darkness, my entire world of $8,000 tech reduced to a pile of useless plastic. The only light was the dim, red glow of the embers in the wood-burning stove in the corner of Miles's cabin, where I'd been staying. "Damn it," I muttered, my voice shaky. I fumbled for my phone. The battery was at 14%. And of course, no service. "The power's out." Miles's voice came from the armchair in the dark. "Yep. When does it come back on?" "Probably Saturday. Maybe Monday. Generators for the forge, not the house." I felt a real, primal wave of panic. I was trapped. I was cold. And I was completely, totally disconnected. The cabin was old, and the wind was finding every single crack. I was already freezing. "It's cold," I said, stating the obvious, my teeth already starting to chatter. I was wearing a cashmere sweater, and it was doing nothing. Miles just grunted. He got up, his large frame a shadow against the dying embers. I heard him pull on a heavy jacket and boots. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice high with alarm. "Gotta get more wood," he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. He opened the door, was hit by a blast of icy wind, and then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. He came back 20 minutes later, his arms loaded with split logs, his beard and hair dusted with ice. He didn't say a word. He just knelt at the wood stove, his back to me, and began the methodical, patient work of building a real fire. He laid the kindling, he stacked the logs, he used a bellows to nurse the embers into a flame. Soon, the stove was roaring, a deep, pulsing, living sound. The room was flooded with a warm, orange light. He sat back on his heels, just watching it for a moment, making sure it had caught. He was completely calm. He was in his element. I was a useless, shivering creature from another planet. He finally looked at me. I was huddled on the couch, wrapped in a thin wool blanket, my knees drawn up to my chest, still shaking. "That's not going to cut it," he said. He disappeared into a back room and came back with 2 massive, heavy-looking quilts. They looked handmade. He didn't just hand them to me. He unfolded one and draped it over me, tucking it in around my shoulders. "You're not built for this, are you, city boy?" "I'm fine," I lied, my voice trembling. He just grunted and sat in the old, worn rocking chair across from me, between me and the stove. He just sat, watching the fire. I was so tired. The stress, the cold, the absolute lack of control. It was overwhelming. I tried to stay awake. I really did. I tried to think about the audit, about the numbers. But the cabin was finally getting warm. The sound of the wind was a howl, but the thump, thump, thump of the fire in the stove was a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. I watched him, a solid, unmoving silhouette in the rocking chair. And I just gave up. I curled into a ball under the heavy quilts and fell asleep, right there on his couch. I woke up hours later. I didn't know what time it was. It was still pitch black outside, the storm still screaming like a banshee. But I was incredibly, intensely warm. The cabin was a cocoon, a pocket of safety in the middle of the chaos. I sat up, the heavy quilts pooling in my lap. The fire in the stove was a raging, beautiful inferno. It was hotter than before. And in the rocking chair, Miles was still there. He was awake. He was just sitting there, a silent guardian, staring into the flames. He hadn't gone to bed. He must have heard me move, because he turned his head. His face was lit by the firelight, all harsh shadows and warm, orange highlights. "You're awake," he said. His voice was a low rumble. Were you just sitting there all night?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. "Gotta feed the fire," he said, as if it were obvious. "This old stove eats logs every 2 hours. You get cold, you get sick." Seemed like a lot of paperwork. I just stared at him. He had stayed awake all night, in a cold, uncomfortable chair, just to keep the fire going. Just to keep me warm. The guy who was there to ruin his life and sell his family's legacy for parts. I didn't know what to say. The usual words, the legal disclaimers, the precise, empty arguments, they were all useless. "Thank you," I whispered. He just nodded, then he stood up, his big frame unfolding. He grabbed the iron poker, one I was sure he'd made himself, and stoked the fire, sending a fresh shower of sparks up the flue. "It's almost dawn," he said, his back to me. "Storm's breaking." He was right. The wind was dying down. The long, cold night was almost over. And in that moment, in that warm, safe, firelit room, I looked at this soot-covered, stubborn, quiet man, and I didn't see a failed businessman. I saw the strongest, most capable person I had ever met. The next day, the power was still out. My tech was still dead. My audit was a joke. "Since I'm useless," I said, finding him in the forge, "show me. Show me what you do." He looked at me surprised, but he nodded. For the next 2 days, with the roads still closed, I became his apprentice. He didn't let me touch the hot metal, but he let me work the bellows. He let me sledgehammer a piece of scrap. I shoveled coal. I got covered in soot. My hands were blistered, my back ached, but I felt alive. I watched him work. It wasn't just banging on metal. It was a dance. It was an art. He'd heat the steel until it was the color of the sun, and then, with a rhythm that was almost musical, he'd shape it. He was creating. He was making something real, something permanent, out of fire and air and sheer force of will. On the last day, as I was packing my now useless gear into my now recharged car, I handed him the file. "I'm telling them it's not fraud," I said. "And it's not incompetence. It's an asset class they don't understand. I'm recommending they don't liquidate. I'm recommending they invest. New roof. Better marketing. An actual website." He just looked at me, wiping his sooty hands on his apron. "Why?" "Because," I said, and I was surprised by how much I meant it. "It's real. And it's worth saving." He just nodded, a slow, strange, unreadable expression on his face. "Well, Arthur the accountant," he said, "you're a weird damn suit. You know that? You're a terrible businessman, Miles Croft, I said, smiling. He closed the distance between us, and he smelled like coal smoke and cold air. He cupped my face with one of his big, rough, soot-covered hands, leaving a black thumbprint on my jaw. Stay for dinner, he said. It wasn't a question. And I did.